I'm George Curtis. Welcome to It's Your Law. Each week it's my privilege to bring you and me guests that are involved in the process of law making, law enforcing, law changing, law violating. It's important that we as citizens understand our law because it affects all of us and our families and our property. And when I get a chance to talk to somebody who's representing us in the legislature in Madison, it's a real treat because I think those people are dangerous. They're powerful. They change our lives, and we don't usually know about it until after it's happened. I'm real lucky today. I not only have a representative, it's a representative who represents me. A Republican, but that doesn't seem to affect his common sense. I think that he is a level-headed guy who listens to all of us, whether we voted for him or not. I voted for him. I've just found out why. Nobody was running against him. Anyway, his name is Mike Schraa, and I'm delighted to have him on the show.
Good to see you again.
Thank you very much. I think it's important that you are willing to share your ideas with the people that you represent. And I discovered maybe a month ago in reading some of the papers that you are the chairman of the Corrections Committee in the legislature for the representatives down there. And I have long felt that corrections was a tremendous waste of money, not being properly applied, so unnecessarily expensive. I'm sure that you've got up-to-date figures and I don't, but it's been my impression over the years that we spend more money on corrections than education in this state. And more we're learning that corrections don't correct anything. They punish, right, but they don't necessarily correct. So tell me about your interest in corrections.
Well, as you said, it's a huge part of our $74 billion budget. It's about $1.3 billion per year, so it's $2.6 billion for the biennium that we spend. It's the fourth largest agency. It's got 10,000 employees, so you know it's an important role as chairman of corrections. Last session I served on Joint Finance, which is the budget committee, so I learned a lot about the budget process. I have 8 correctional facilities in the 53rd District, so it was kind of a natural thing for me to become chair of corrections.
So we're talking about billions of dollars, all coming from the taxpayer?
Yeah.
And I suppose there's another level of expense, because if we have former wage earners locked up, somebody still has to make up the tax deficit, because when they're in prison at 12 cents an hour or 8 cents an hour, they're not paying much in taxes. And then who's supporting their families that they formerly supported?
Right. And that's part of my initiative this session when Secretary Litcher came and testified. A couple of his concerns were the geriatric issue that we have in our prison system. Lincoln Hills, was one of the top concerns, and we talked a lot about that in the 5.5-hour hearing. One of the unintended consequences that happened with a bill and an act that was signed last session, Act 371, was the fourth offense drunk driving bills that we passed, Act 371. And they were 5-year plus mandatory minimums. So in other words, if somebody was caught and arrested for a fourth offense, drunk driving or higher, you're automatically going to prison for 5 years. It could be 6, could be 7, depending on the actual felony charge. So I think it was a unanimous vote. All of us in the assembly, I think Democrats and Republicans voted for that. Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, were lobbying hard. The Tavern League even supported it because nobody wants their loved ones, hit and killed by a drunk driver. The unintended consequence of that is, and I found this out in January, the Fiscal Bureau and the Department of Transportation did a fiscal memo and basically said that because of that act being passed, that it would put an additional anywhere from 1,700 to 2,000 individuals into prison for 5 years. And we've got a capacity of 21,000 prisoners in Wisconsin. And our total population right now is about 2,000 over that, about 23,000. So we're already overcrowded. And as the chair of corrections, I just saw it problematic that we were going to be warehousing an additional 2,000 people for 5 years. And really they're not going to get any AOTA counseling, maybe a couple months at the end of their sentence. And I just saw that cycle returning. They're going to lose their family, they're going to lose their job. So I was tasked with, and I guess I was given the ability to, growing up, I've always kind of been an entrepreneur, and I just started thinking out of the box as to what we could do differently. A lot of these individuals with fourth offense drunk driving charges and higher have drinking problems. They have an addiction. And by warehousing them for 5 years, we're not doing them any good. It costs the state more money. And so I came up with this initiative. It's called WISC Great. It stands for Walking in Sobriety, Growth, Recovery, Employment, and Transformation. And so basically what my initiative does, if somebody would be arrested for a fourth offense, drunk driving or higher, the judge could sentence them to go into this program called WISC Great that Department of Corrections will develop. It's a 12 to 18 month intensive alcohol treatment program. But the key to it is the individual would stay employed. It'd be a Huber type program where DOC employees would drive them back and forth to work. And it would be a pilot program that I'd like to start here in Winnebago County. That radius would run probably all the way up to Green Bay, over to Stevens Point, down to West Bend. So if the person had a job in that area, DOC would drive them to work in the morning, pick them up, bring them back, and then they'd get several hours of this intense alcohol treatment in the evening and on weekends. If they'd complete that successfully after 12 to 18 months, it would turn into an ERP, a earned release type program. So let's say they had a 5-year sentence and they completed this this program in 18 months, then they would be released on probation for the remaining 3.5 years. But in the meantime, they've kept their job. They've served their time. They've gotten intense alcohol treatment that really is going to get at the core issue of the problem, instead of them just kind of being warehoused for 5 years in prison and getting a few classes here and there on AODA classes at the end. So I really see it as a redemptive thing where that money then that individual is earning is going to be sent back to the family to keep them off of food stamps and Badger care and keep that family functioning, keep that family intact. So when this individual does complete his programming, he goes back to a family instead of having nothing and not having a job. The initiative has been very supportive, supported by the governor, by my colleagues in the assembly. The governor is wanting Wisconsin to be a place where we're winning and working, and this is one way that we're keeping people in the workforce, because as you know, an alcoholic could be blue collar, white collar, laborer. They come from all backgrounds.
Hold that thought, Mike. We've used up our first segment, and I think you've done a great job of laying out your goals with this program. After our first break, we're going to come back, and I'm going to ask you to explain to the people how much it costs per person per year to have them locked up under our present system.
Okay.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Law. My guest is Mike Schraa. He's our representative from the 53rd District to Madison, and he's thinking out of the box. And I think it's absolutely wonderful that somebody takes a different look at our approach to people who have committed crimes. They're people with problems, and there's been a distinct shortage of perfect people in my life. We all make mistakes, and we've got some responsibility when we do make mistakes. But in our penal system, it doesn't look like we're punishing the person who committed the crime as much as we're punishing the family of the person who committed the crime and the taxpayers. What is the current cost of keeping a person in prison?
DOC, Department of Corrections, estimates that it's about $32,000 a year to house an inmate in the state of Wisconsin.
And then, has anyone calculated the expense of losing their income and the taxes from their income and the effect on the families and the support of the families?
Yeah, that's huge. I don't think there's ever been a fiscal on that. It would probably be very hard to estimate that, but you've got a great point in that, part of the reason for my initiative was to keep that person employed, keep that family intact. I go to all the CISA 6 meetings here in Oshkosh, and I didn't think it was really relative to education, but I brought out my initiative. And Ted Knightsky, the administrator over there, a couple of weeks ago, was all excited, and was very supportive of my initiative and just praised it and said, this kind of thinking, he said, you have to understand that these are our kids' parents that are going to prison, and it affects every, generational. It's a generational effect. They go to prison, and the kids act out, and so it affects all aspects of our society, and I'm excited about it. It's got a lot of support with my colleagues. The governor's very supportive. I'm hoping with the joint finance process that's coming up, we go into exec session for the Department of Corrections next week, and I'm hopeful that I get the $5 million that I asked for in the budget. But if nothing else, I hope that I can get the language put into state statutes so that it requires Department of Corrections to develop a program called WISC-RATE, an alcohol initiative, that would have that work release aspect to it.
And you've actually taken some steps. You know where there's a building available. You know what it will cost to rehab the building. Right. You have a plan that is ready for implementation.
Yeah. The building that I'm actually looking at is Kempster Hall, the old Kempster Hall at Winnebago Mental Health Institute. Department of Corrections owns the building. It's been sitting empty for 6-7 years. That was the facility that the Drug Abuse Correctional Center, or DAC, housed their 300 people in before they built their new facility just about a block away. So the building has great bones, and it was built in the 50s. It's beautiful on the inside. It obviously needs to be brought up to code, and that is part of the ask, the $5 million ask. And I'd love the pilot program to be in Winnebago County. We'd go for a couple of years to get data to see if actually the recidivism rate was lower after people participated in this program. But I'm not tied to Winnebago County. I just know that as a state, we need to do something. And I know how slow the state government works, and a lot of times that's a good thing. But in this case, it'll probably be at least 2 to 3 years before we get a building rehabbed or workable and get this program developed. And the unfortunate thing is that we're probably going to have an additional 2,000 to 3,000 individuals that will be serving time in prison. And my goal is to be able to, even if they've served for 6 months or a year, once this program is operating, I'd like to be able to pull them out and to have them participate. It's an evidence-based program that DAC does right now. DAC does a 4 to 7 month evidence-based program, and this, and although the wording is probably bad, I call it DAC on steroids because it's really just extending the time out to 12 to 18 months. It's pretty much the same evidence-based program. But it's got the work element in, and that's why you extend it out a little bit more, because you're keeping the person's hands busy, you're keeping them productive, you're keeping them feeling good about themselves, and that money, as I stated before, is going back to the family. And it's really, as you said, it's keeping the taxpayers in the state of Wisconsin whole, because they're not having, hopefully to pay out food share and food stamps and Badger Care.
At some point, these prisoners are going to be released.
Right.
And the longer we have them locked up, out of circulation in the real world, the less capable they're going to be productive.
Right.
The longer they're out of circulation, the less chance that they still have a family when they get out. And so it's a win-win if we can keep them in touch with their families, keep supporting their families, keep paying taxes, keep their job skills up.
Right.
I think we've learned that punishment is not correction.
Right.
And putting people on ice and, as you say, giving them a couple of weeks of prep time when they're about to leave prison doesn't solve the problem. They're still not equipped to compete. They should never be taken out of the workforce.
Yeah. Alcohol is an addiction. I grew up with two alcoholic parents, and they, both were in recovery, for 25 plus years. And I've got that background. I know the devastating effects that it has on a family, and that's probably made me a little bit more sensitive to this whole initiative. But I'm really excited because the fact that you're actually going to get at the core issues. When you go into recovery, a 30-day or 60-day program, you can kind of fake it. When you're in recovery for 12 to 18 months in group therapy and with therapists and social workers and psychiatrists, it's a lot harder to fake it. And you're going to get at the core issue, whether it was trauma, abuse, a family history of alcoholism. That's what I've been learning, that this long of a program, 12 to 18 months, is going to get at. The unfortunate thing is, and maybe it's fortunate, but the unfortunate thing, I think, is that there's no other program in the country that we're finding that is putting these two things together. The longer therapy program, the alcohol therapy, along with the work release, the work aspect of it. And so we don't have data to go to other states to look to see how their recidivism rate is. That's why we want this to be a pilot program, and I believe it's going to be successful. I think it'll have a very low recidivism rate, and it's got a real redemptive value to it, because a lot of these individuals, they're addicted, they're alcoholics, they're not breaking and entering, they're not carjacking. Obviously, if somebody injures someone or kills somebody in a drunk driving charge, they're probably not going into this program. There's going to have to be some consequences. But for the most part, these individuals have an addiction problem.
They're sick. They are sick people. And we're going to take another break, and when we come back, we're going to revisit that very subject.
Okay.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Law. Mike Schraa and I are talking about our penal system. It is a big business. It is an expensive business. It's a heartbreaking business. It's probably a necessary business, but we're not really sure it's working. It's costly to the victims of crimes, of course. It's costly to people who are convicted. It's costly to their families and their employers, and really most of these costs trickle down to the taxpayers, who were led to believe by politicians that if we send people away, they will not commit again. But that doesn't prove to be true, does it?
No, I think we're finding that out, and I think in this legislature over the last couple sessions, there's been more of an ability for some of us to look at some restorative justice measures, because what we've been doing in the past doesn't seem to be working. And so as chair of corrections, I'm tasked with the corrections budget overall, and we just got to start thinking out of the box in some of these areas. With my WISC initiative, I have another initiative that deals with the geriatric issue in our prisons. I believe that is going to get funded. We're going to probably be buying a nursing home in a county that's close to here and actually turning that into a prison so that we can humanely take care of these individuals that a lot of them are in their end of life or hospice type situations. They need rehab. They spend 6 to 9 months in a hospital or a nursing home getting rehab. So there's tremendous costs to the state because these prison facilities aren't suitable, aren't capable of taking care of their needs. So I've got that initiative. That will save the state probably $20 to $30 million, I figured. Fiscal Bureau did a note on it, and there'll be a tremendous amount of savings if we actually, take this nursing home and turn it into a geriatric prison. It doesn't need a lot of correctional officers. It needs nurses and CNAs because these individuals are in wheelchairs, and the flight risk is minimal. But we have some real issues in DOC. One of the things we've got 10,000 employees, and out of that, there's probably 4,000 to 5,000 that are actual correctional officers. And Act 10 was tough in the state. It was probably necessary, but it created a lot of dissension. And I think, it's been 6 years. I think many people have gotten over it, but we still have huge vacancy situations, and it's forcing a ton of overtime for these individuals, and we're having a hard time recruiting into the academy. So I actually have a couple more budget motions that would develop a pay grid. In this budget, the governor proposed giving a 2% and a 2% pay increase, general wage adjustment. And I think that's going to stay. So state employees have not had a raise for probably 8 years, other than 2 1% cost of living raises. My pay grid would actually give some light at the end of the tunnel and increase a correctional officer's pay over a 5-year period.
But it's not just the pay. I think we both know that it is a very unhealthy place to work as a correctional officer. Mm-hmm. And the stresses on our correctional officers, and most of the public refers to them as guards, and I sometimes do too, is very, very serious health hazard. It's not a healthy place. What can we do about that?
Well, one of the things I think is just appreciating, their service. A lot of these individuals, this is a career. It's just not a job. And they come into work every day. They risk their lives. These are tough environments that they're going into. You go to Waupun, which is the 4th oldest prison in the United States, built in 1848. It's an old prison. It's the sight lines are poor. It's stressful when you're dealing with some of these very hardened criminals who are lifers that really there's no chance of them getting out, so they misbehave even worse in prison. And, they're put into segregation and they act out. Being a correctional officer is not an easy job. The rates of suicide, the rates of alcoholism are very high with correctional officers. So, as I said, I think acknowledging the fact that they're really doing a service to the state of Wisconsin. They're keeping us protected, and showing some appreciation by giving them a little bit more money. I have another budget motion that actually recognizes their years of service and gives a one-time dollar amount to, depending on the number of years that they have been in service in the Department of Corrections. So I'm really hopeful that these initiatives, are recognized by my colleagues on Joint Finance, and they pass them, and the governor sees the benefit of maybe paying these individuals a little bit more to show our appreciation.
Well, I was delighted to read in the paper that you were visiting Lincoln County, Lincoln Hills, and the youthful prisons up there where we've got well-publicized difficulties, and that you're looking at the geriatric prisoner. situation, because that's a tragedy in itself. And you're looking at the productivity problems of taking people out of production. You're looking at the taxpayers' problems because it's so expensive to warehouse people. And you're looking at the problems of health for our guards, our officers, because that's an unhealthy place to be a prisoner, and it's an unhealthy place to be an officer. I am so glad you're thinking out of the box. You're not one of these politicians who said, throw the key away and our problems will disappear, because they haven't disappeared.
Right.
They have just made one more prisoner, and that's the taxpayer.
Yep.
I want to thank you.
Yeah. Thank you,
Keep up the
George.
good work.
Thank you very much.
And we'll be right back. It's a little scary when we consider that we are the most imprisoned nation in the world. A higher percentage of our population is in prison than in any other country. It's even more scary to realize that here in the state of Wisconsin, we are not only one of the most imprisoned states, but we have twice the people in prison that they have in the state of Minnesota, which has about the same population. It's even worse when we consider that we know imprisonment does not work. The biggest growth areas in crime are drugs and alcohol. Largely illnesses, also crimes, but we have learned that imprisoning people has not solved either one. It is so refreshing to have a politician like today's guest, Mike Schraa, who doesn't just play the game of appeasing the voters by saying, lock them up, longer terms, throw the key away. He realized that these are illnesses, and illnesses need a new approach. He's got some good ideas. Contact your representative and discuss them. Maybe we can actually head in the right direction during your lifetime and mine. I'm George Curtis. That's my opinion.